Our next speaker is Khatchig Mouradian. And Khatchig has a PhD from Strassler Center for Holocaust Genocide Studies at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, and a graduate certificate in conflict resolution from the University of Massachusetts. He's a lecturer in Middle Eastern, South Asian, African Studies at Columbia University. He's the author of articles on genocide, mass violence, and unarmed resistance, the co-editor of a forthcoming book on the late Ottoman history, and he's the editor of the journal, the Armenian Review. And the topic he's going to cover today is about the main founder, the founder of the First Republic of Armenia, and it's an interesting title, Life and Legacy of, oh, it changes here, Becoming Aram, Life and Legacy of a Revolutionary Statesman.
This is a project that I started working on almost a year ago, and what seemed to be something that I thought would be a book chapter that I would be done with after, within that period, ended up to be a project that I kept working more and more on. And what I will be presenting here today, both in the interest of time and because this is the period that I have focused so far more on, is going to be the formative years of Aram Manukyan. Now, this is as a brief introduction. I've titled it Becoming Aram. And I will argue in this paper that although most chroniclers and a number of historians who have written on Aram, not many, present Aram, almost project him backwards, presenting him as this born leader. In fact, even Armenian genocide deniers, in their, I have a couple of references to Armenian genocide deniers who refer to Aram Manukyan as a born leader. What I will be showing here is that one of the more compelling reality is that Aram, in fact, was a leader that was not at all born, was made. And was made through sometimes chance, sometimes circumstances, sometimes mistakes again, and sometimes luck and opportunities. But he was also a leader because of certain characteristics that he honed over years. And I will be using mainly material from the Ottoman archives and the ARF archives, including Aram's own letters, a large collection of which is going to be published very soon, I hope, by Yervan Pambukyan. Now, let me start with a few words about the material I'm using. I'm using a material from, as I said, primarily from the ARF archives in Boston. This has been, over the past year, one of the less advertised but tremendous successes of organizing material and gradually making it available to scholars. Over the past year, thousands upon thousands of documents have been cataloged. Thousands of documents have been organized, scanned, digitized. And a number of scholars, including Melissa Bilal, Haik Temoyan, Bedros Termatosyan, I think Varta Matyosyan as well, Varak Getzeman and others, have made use of these archives. It constitutes the very backbone of my work. As I said, this is just a small portion that I'm going to be presenting today. And I would like to thank the director of the archives, George Arjayan, for the tremendous support he has provided. Some of the material you'll see here are cataloged documents, others are not. And I will also be showing some photographs as I illustrate my point. So let's start. If you told Aram Manukyan on March 6, 1908, that within a decade he would successfully lead the defense of Van against the Ottoman military, save tens of thousands of Armenians from imminent murder, become the temporary governor of Van after the withdrawal of Turkish forces, and then emerge as the founder of the first Armenian Republic as Tsarist Russia faltered, he probably would have had a good laugh. After all, that day seemed to usher in the end of Aram's life as a free man, if not his life altogether, as Turkish policemen and soldiers dragged him out of a 30-foot deep well where he was hiding with fellow revolutionaries and escorted him to the military commander's residence where they were interrogated, photographed, and sent to solitary confinement. This is the photograph that was taken as Aram and his fellow revolutionaries were taken out of the well. Let's see, we see Aram here, and this is Dajat Terlemezyan. I will be coming back to Dajat Terlemezyan later. The story of what got Aram, born Sarkis Ovanesyan, into that quagmire, what got him out of it, and what turned him into the founder of Armenian statehood after an interregnum of 5 centuries, is a combination of luck, resilience, mistakes, experience, and unwavering will that shaped him into a leader who ruled the borderlands of 2 empires and established a home for his nation. Chroniclers projected the Aram they knew backwards, fashioning the image of a born leader. Yet what makes Aram's journey from quote-unquote inexperienced revolutionary to statesman remarkable, I would argue, is the process through which he became a leader. The youngest of 5 children, Sarkis Ovanesyan, often referred to as Sergei, was born March 19, 1879 in Shushi. There is some discussion in the scholarship about where he was born, but I believe that scholars, particularly in Armenia, have settled the issue here, and Shushi seems to be the likely birthplace. Sergei was a student in his hometown when the Armenian Revolutionary Federation was established, and he joined the ranks of the party within a few years. He was expelled from his Armenian school for revolutionary activity in 1901, completed his secondary education in Yerevan at the age of 24, and then moved to Baku, where he served the party apparatus. He helped fight Tsarist Russia's anti-Armenian policies and organized labor protests and gatherings for the workers in the city's burgeoning oil industry. Sergei's, Aram's, brief tenure in Baku helped hone his organizational and oratorial skills, preparing him for the revolutionary kiln of Kars, but was also formative ideologically. Writing about the discussions at the 4th ARF World Congress in Vienna, 1907, ARF leader Simon Vratsian summed up Aram's, by the way, this document, a fascinating document, is the arrest warrant of Aram Manukyan by the Ottoman authorities. It is found in the ARF archives. So, ARF leader Simon Vratsian summed up Aram's ideological allegiances by saying he was a staunch socialist with us, the lefties, but he would be willing to abandon socialism and us if necessary. He was an Armenian in the mold of Rostom and Dr. Zavriev. Socialist, yes, but first and foremost an Armenian. The Armenian Revolutionary Federation in Kars was not your average operation, and Aram dove in headfirst in fall 1903, after a short stop in Ganzak. The revolutionary kiln of the Kars province was a place where the Dashnak novices came out fired and molded. Now, this is a quote, The revolutionary kiln of the Kars province was a place where the Dashnak novices came out fired and molded, or, unable to withstand its extreme ideological and Spartan lifestyle, renounced the revolutionary path, wrote chronicler Rupender Minasyan. Here, Sergei distinguished himself as an effective communicator and propagandist, and served in the network that organized the passage of armed revolutionary groups to the Ottoman Empire. Anxious to support the Armenians waging an asymmetric battle against the Ottoman military in Sasun, the ARF in Russia sent group after group of Armenian revolutionaries, but most were killed crossing the border, long before arriving in Sassoon. Sergei itched to traverse the border and join the Armenians there. So, Sassoon's untimely outburst, the failed attempt of countless arms smuggling groups and their massacres on the border, and the martyrdom of my close friends had rendered me hopeless. I was tormented by the thought that everyone went and got massacred, and I, as if through my cunning, stayed behind, he wrote later. By the time Sergei managed to cross the border, Sassoon had fallen to the Ottoman armies. He had to settle for Van. An incident in Sergei's journey in Van prior to crossing the Iranian border stands out as a testament to what he himself referred to as revolutionary inexperience. Staying in the house of an Armenian family in the village where he awaited a Turkish guide to help him and his comrades cross the Araxes River to Iran, Sergei decided to disassemble the dynamite capsules he was carrying with him to render them safer for travel on horseback. He laid out the explosives on the table and started emptying the capsules, engaging the host family, a couple and their child, in the process. Suddenly, a capsule in Sergei's hands caught fire, and the flame engulfed everything on the table. And this is Aram speaking. Again, I'm referring to him as Sergei, and you'll see what I'm doing here. I automatically threw myself under the table. The school teacher and his wife, the couple, less experienced, remained standing and were exposed to the blows of the horrible explosion. The school teacher lost a few fingers and his face got burned. The poor wife, and especially the child, received greater injuries, he confessed. I sort of knew just a little bit about explosives. Again, this is Aram writing. More in the theoretical sense than in the practical, as I had just once or twice had been present in tests conducted by others at that, he acknowledged. The incident recounted by Sergei himself in a forthright manner points to the reality that while he was still a work in progress as he left the revolutionary kiln of Kars and journeyed to Van, he was yet to become a born leader. The harsh winter conditions impeded Sergei's journey, imposing upon him a 4-month stint, October 1904 till January 1905, at the St. Thaddeus Monastery in northern Iran near the Ottoman border. He wrote to Gomes Varan Papazian, the leader of the ARF in Van, from the monastery in a letter dated November 29, 1904, explaining his circumstances. I am forced to stay here until spring. The roads are buried in snow. This is, by the way, a sample from Aram's handwriting from the ARF archives. This particular letter is from 1912. This is the oldest surviving letter we have from Sergei, and it is signed Aram. This is also the earliest instance the nom de guerre appears, and therefore, henceforth, I'm going to be referring to him as Aram. So the first reference we have of him, or any reference referring to him as Aram, is this particular letter. He went on to report, in the spring, I'm hoping that at the earliest opportunity, we can send large amounts of dough and apples. He's not making pancakes here or apple pie. In Dashnak speak, dough was understood to be gunpowder, apples were bombs, explosives. Curiously, Aram touted his expertise in dough and apples operations in this letter, written only a few weeks after the explosion that maimed 3 people. It is possible that he was simply playing up his knowledge of explosives. Yet a more plausible explanation is that his revolutionary inexperience, right before crossing the border to the inferno of Yergir, alarmed him. And he decided to use his stint at the St. Thaddeus Monastery to educate himself on explosives. One of his 3 companions was indeed an expert, and perused the encyclopedias and books at the monastery to deepen his knowledge on everything he deemed relevant to his mission. The letters Aram sent to Van from the monastery support this hypothesis. In one, he writes to Gomes at length about the advantages of breeding carrier pigeons and how he himself has started doing so after reading about them in an encyclopedia. There is dedicated literature on the subject, Aram writes. If you want, I can send you at least what's in the encyclopedic dictionary, which can serve as a reliable guide. End of quote. It is unclear what happened to Aram's proposal, but 2 months later, in early February, Aram finally arrived in Van after a tumultuous journey, and Gomes welcomed him warmly. The first time I met him, and this is again Gomes speaking, writing, I already felt that the newcomer was a serious, mature, and capable asset of a person. Gomes wrote in his memoir, extolling Aram's experience in Baku, Kars, and the borderlands between Russia and Iran. This region in the aughts of the 20th century was bustling with revolutionary activity. And Aram quickly asserted himself despite initial resistance from the local party members who typically viewed revolutionaries arriving from the Caucasus with suspicion. Within months, Aram became a pillar of the ARF's Van operation, extending the organization's reach and forging alliances. Contemporaries praise Aram's efforts to find common ground and cooperate with other Armenian groups, like the Hunchakians and particularly the Armenagans, as well as neutral Armenian circles. And this is Gomes again. Aram was adept at making a good impression, generating affinity, and gradually bringing others into the fold, observed Gomes. Circumstances on the ground contributed to Aram's ascent. This is crucial. A number of events, again and again, throughout his career, the situation propels Aram forward, and he lives up to the expectations. The situation propels him forward, he lives up to the expectations. So Gomes left Van soon after Aram's arrival, leaving a void that Aram readily filled. The same thing happens, by the way, I'm going to quickly make a segue here, during the Van Rebellion. During the Van Rebellion, Aram was the lead figure, yet he wouldn't have been had some of his own comrades and leaders, at least 2 others, including Ishkhan, had they not been killed. So again, it's important to note that this is a picture of Aram with Ishkhan, a rare photograph. The photograph of Ishkhan is seen, but this is one of the very few pictures we have, if not the only picture we have, of Aram actually with weapons. Again, from the ARF archives. However, Aram was first and foremost engaged in the process of procuring weapons from Russia and arranging their transport to Van, in fulfillment of the ARF's plan to arm the Armenian peasantry in the region and prepare them for self-defense against local aggression and extirpation. This was his main role in the region until he left for the 4th ARF-WUS Congress held in Vienna in early 1907. Aram's letters were full of instructions. We have around 400 letters from Aram alone. Are full of instructions about effective and safe modes of transportation of bomb-making materials. In a letter dated March 11, 1905, addressed to Malchas, he explained his tactics to discourage betrayal and ensure the safe transport of goods. For example, sellers and transporters were not paid for the last service rendered until the following time. Always owed, sometimes significant amounts, these local Kurds and Turks had a vested interest in keeping their mouths shut, lest they lose their money if authorities arrested their contacts. Aram's letters are phenomenal in this regard. They really highlight this, his abilities to organize, his abilities to instruct, and inform his comrades about how to best deal with situations on the ground. And we see a lot here that is gradually changing in Aram's outlook, in Aram's experience. But the greatest betrayal, one of the costliest in Armenian revolutionary history, was not committed by Kurds or Turks, but by an Armenian revolutionary. Davo, and I'm going to be very brief here, this is a lecture on its own. Davo was in a relationship with Satanik. Davo was a fellow revolutionary of Aram's in Van. He was in a relationship with Satanik, the sister of Ales, another ARF revolutionary. When Satanik became pregnant out of wedlock, Ales threatened to kill Davo unless the ARF resolved the issue. Davo refused to marry Satanik and accused Aram of impregnating her. The party made it clear that Davo must either marry Satanik or suffer the consequences of his act. This is the Central Committee of Van, Dikvan, Ishkhan, Hamazas, Aram, you see as well, and Malchas. These are some pictures. I will come to this next. The party made it clear that Davo must either marry Satanik or suffer the consequences of his act. The confrontation led Davo to engage in the unthinkable, to go to the Ottoman authorities and expose the locations of numerous ARF weapons caches in return for protection. This is probably one of the largest betrayals of Armenian revolutionary history. The betrayal brought the powder keg of Van to the brink of explosion. A flurry of actions followed. Now what happens is that you have weapons caches, a number of them, hundreds of kilograms of explosives, hundreds of weapons are being exposed by the Ottoman authorities because of the information that Davo is providing. And the ARF, so the ARF started moving weapons caches to new locations. The Ottoman authorities cracked down on the revolutionaries in the region and placed Van under siege. Dajat Terlemezian, whose picture I showed earlier in a group, an ARF member in his late teens, assassinated Davo following party orders. These are some documents from the ARF archives. I have no time to go into this. Essentially requesting more and more information about the Davo affair. This is a publication, handwritten publication from 1908, where Tavit Davajan is one of the elements. That's the details of the document. An ARF member in his late teens assassinated Davo following party orders. And then 19 revolutionaries, including Aram and Dajat, went into hiding in a well. This brings us to March 6, 1908. Had it not been for the Young Turk coup, known as the Young Turk Revolution of July 1908, Aram would have likely been hanged and remembered today primarily as a revolutionary who smuggled hundreds of kilograms of explosives and thousands of weapons from Russian Empire to the Ottoman Empire to defend the Ottoman Armenian peasantry against Turkish and Kurdish oppression. But the coup ushered in a brief period of freedom, and the ARF leaders, allies of the Young Turks in the revolution, were released from prison. I'm concluding. 30-year-old Aram, 30 by the way, was a free man and finally a born leader. During the next decade, he would successfully lead the defense of Van against the Ottoman military, save tens of thousands of Armenians from imminent murder, become the temporary governor of Van after the withdrawal of the Turkish forces, and then emerge as a founder of the first Armenian Republic as Tsarist Russia falters. He died of typhus in Yerevan on January 29, 1919. He was 40. His funeral in Yerevan was one of the most widely attended the Armenian nation had ever witnessed. In his eulogy, ARF leader and statesman Nigol Akhpalyan told the nation. These are some photographs from the Van Rebellion. Ottoman documents about the Van Rebellion. Aram is mentioned as the sole leader after the killing of the two others. This is Aram teaching in Urdu as a teacher, very rare photograph. This is Aram here, the Declaration of Independence. And finally, ARF leader and statesman Nigol Akhpalyan told the nation in his eulogy, "When the night falls, withdraw into the back chambers of your souls, speak to your conscience, and ask, have you worked for the Armenian people as Aram has? Have you been as self-sacrificing? Have you dedicated your entire life to the Armenian people as Aram has?" Thank you.
This was the period when the construction of the trains, which Professor Bernutian talked about, was any of the transportation of weapons, bombing equipment, and so forth, done by train?
I would just add, maybe this is an opportunity to say just a couple words about the arms, how the weapons were transported. And by the way, I believe that it is impossible in Armenian historiography to really understand the nitty-gritty details and the broader contours of of arms transport in this period, in the early 1900s, without the treasure trove of Aram Manukyan's letters about it. It really provides more information than we have, a lot more than we have in memoirs, other accounts, other testimonies, and it's part of his meticulous approach to a lot of this. So we know, for example, a lot about the different kinds of weapons, the prices of weapons, when they're coming from Russia. He distinguishes between certain components of weapons that are cheaper in the Ottoman Empire, easier to acquire in the Ottoman Empire. Another thing he would do is that in order for these weapons to not be usable or not be easily stolen, he instructs his comrades on the other side to tear them apart and then ship them in different pieces, right, in different shipments. So what would happen is that he reassembles them back in Van, you know, after these different batches are coming. So there's all of this in great detail. He keeps writing and providing insight clearly to his, of course, comrades, but at the same time to the historians that will come, you know, 100 years later. So although the modes of transport changed, so there was a time when the ARF heavily relied on large numbers of armed fighters crossing borders. There was a time when this, you know, massacres of a lot of these fighters, you know, there was a change of strategy, smaller groups. There was further changes in strategy, using locals, Kurds, Turks, and others by employing other modes of transportation. A lot of this happened, though. There were certain nodes in this process. Of course, you know, the weapons were mostly being procured from Russia. So some of these nodes constitute places like Kars, places like, you know, the borderlands between, you know, Iran, Russian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. And certain monasteries, the St. Therius is an example, was one of the places where a lot of these interactions also happened. The railroad was used in order, excuse me? Okay, I'm happy to keep it short.
We still have time.
So the weapons were being transported mainly, maybe through transport from Russia, but otherwise it was not, there was no use of trains for the transportation after that.
Aram being one of the most influential leaders in our history, how come not enough has been written about Aram as other revolutionaries? What do you think that is?
First, I would like to acknowledge the fact that we have a number of scholars in Armenia who have written on Aram, including one who has written a number of works on Aram. However, the overall assessment remains the same. We do not have a lot of engagement in this. There may be a number of reasons for this, particularly this is a man, I mean, just what I presented shows how, you know, he led a significant part of his life, you know, operating on one side of empire and then switching to the Russian, you know, to the other side in Yerevan leading up to independence and the few months afterwards. And that may be a reason why certain, you know, he hasn't been essentially being on on the borderlands been a focus of attention. I'm not sure, but ultimately there's a lot of lacuna in Armenian scholarship, and Aram is one of them, is a major one. If we consider Aram a founder of the Armenian Republic, it would be unimaginable to think about neighboring countries and their founders not having enough scholarship about them. So it's difficult for me to tell. Maybe other scholars would be able to know why Of course, you know, a lot of the other things that apply to Armenian scholarship, like Sovietization and things like that, also had played a role. And a lot that has been written in the diaspora, particularly by his fellow comrades, etc., are more chronicles of Aram's life and more hagiographies. And that's the thing. I think it's important to engage it in a scholarly manner as well. Thank you for the